Imagine this for a moment. You've got this illiterate peasant girl, barely a teenager. She starts hearing voices. And she's convinced they're from God.
Right.
These voices tell her, lead an army, kick out the invaders, crown the king. And then she actually does it, against all odds.
It sounds unbelievable, doesn't it?
Totally. Only to then be betrayed, put on trial, burned at the stake, all before she's even 20. But here we are, centuries later, still talking about her. She's just this enduring, really complex figure.
Absolutely. One of history's most fascinating.
So that's our deep dive today. We're looking into the incredible legacy of Joan of Arc, not just, the history textbook stuff, but how she's been this constant source of inspiration and, well, interpretation across almost 600 years. Art, books, music, even pop culture.
Yeah, the range is amazing. We've pulled together quite a stack of sources here. Historical accounts, trial records, deep dives into cultural depictions, even some interesting online discussions clearing up myths.
Our mission really is to sift through all this and pull out the key insights, give you a kind of comprehensive but hopefully surprising look at this extraordinary woman and why she still matters.
So we'll get into her military side, which is genuinely surprising.
Definitely. And the drama of those trials, intense stuff.
And then how she's been constantly reimagined, sometimes classically, sometimes in ways you really wouldn't expect.
It's quite a story. So to really get it, we need to start at the beginning, right? Back in her village.
Exactly. Domremy, France. Born around 1412. Daughter of a tenant farmer, Jacques d'Arc.
And her mother, Isabelle Romée, was very devout.
Very. Instilled that deep Catholic faith in Joan. But importantly, Joan herself, she wasn't taught to read or write.
Okay, so what kind of world is she stepping into? What's happening in France around, say, 1429?
Oh, it's chaos. Absolute chaos. France is deep into the 100 Years' War. It's fractured. The English and their allies, the Burgundians, they control a huge chunk of the north.
And the French claimant to the throne, Charles VII, the Dauphin.
Ah!
He's struggling.
Big time. He's kind of clinging on. And the city of Orléans, which is strategically vital, is under this brutal siege. France is desperate. Really desperate for some kind of miracle.
Which sets the stage perfectly for Joan.
Precisely, because that's right around when her own, let's call it, personal miracle starts. Age 13, she begins hearing these voices.
And she's certain they're from God.
Absolutely certain. She identifies them specifically as Archangel Michael, St. Catherine, and St. Margaret, and they give her a very clear mission.
Not just vague feelings, a specific to-do list.
Exactly. Save France, expel the English, get Charles crowned king at Reims. That's the goal. And she also takes a vow of chastity, actually defies her father, who tried to arrange a marriage for her.
Which was a pretty bold move for a young woman back then.
Extremely bold. So next hurdle, convince the actual Dauphin.
Right, how does she even get an audience?
Well, she gets rejected initially by a local commander, but she's persistent, incredibly persistent. And there's this popular prophecy floating around about a maid of Lorraine who's destined to save France. That helps her gain some followers.
Ah, okay, so there was already a kind of expectation.
Sort of, yeah. Enough for her to make this risky 11-day journey through enemy territory to Chinon, where Charles was holding court.
And this is where it gets a bit mysterious, right? The big meeting.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting. The story goes she reveals something to Charles, some secret information that convinces him only a messenger from God could know it. We don't know the exact details, unfortunately.
But whatever it was, it worked.
It was enough. Enough for Charles to take her seriously. Then the church steps in. They examine her at Poitiers for 3 weeks.
Checking her out theologically.
Theologically and physically. They confirm her virginity, which was seen as important, and declare her a good Christian. That's the official green light for her mission.
And we should mention her look. The cropped hair, the men's clothes.
Yes, that's crucial. Very distinctive. Probably practical for riding and fighting, but it becomes a major issue later on during her trial. A huge point of contention.
Okay, so mission approved. She goes from being this village visionary to basically a military figure.
Pretty much overnight, yeah. And this is where her story takes another unexpected turn, her military leadership. When she arrives in 1429, France is, like we said, desperate.
And she brings a new energy.
A whole new approach. Aggressive, always offense, rarely defense. We know of about 13 engagements. She was involved in her troops, won 9 of them.
9 out of 13. That's impressive for anyone, let alone an inexperienced teenager.
Exactly. It wasn't just divine luck. It seems like she had this almost intuitive grasp of warfare, especially emerging stuff like artillery and also the psychological side of it. She just disrupted things.
It really is remarkable. So she wasn't just like a mascot waving a banner.
Yeah.
She was involved in tactics.
Oh, absolutely. She could ride, she could handle a sword, sure. But contemporaries, like the Duke of Alençon, who fought beside her, specifically praised her skill with artillery. Placing cannons effectively. Remember, this is when cannons are starting to become really decisive.
Okay, so she understood firepower.
She really did. Alençon said she acquitted herself magnificently with it. There are some great examples.
Give us one.
Okay, the Siege of Troy. Negotiations had stalled for days. Charles VII is getting frustrated. Joan insists they attack. She spends the night positioning the cannons. Morning comes, she just yells, "To the attack!"
And
The city gives up. Immediately, just like that. Apparently, the sight of her artillery placements was enough to make 500, 600 English and Burgundian soldiers surrender right there.
wow. So it wasn't even a fight, just the threat.
Pure psychological impact combined with tactical positioning. And there's another story from the Siege of Jargeau. She warns the Duke of Alençon, "Move from that spot." He moves. Seconds later, a cannonball hits exactly where he'd been standing, kills another soldier. He saw it as proof of her divine guidance, but you could also say she just had an amazing sense of the battlefield dynamics.
So skill, and maybe something more. And her presence itself, that banner, that must have been powerful too.
Hugely powerful. Her white banner, Jesus, Mary, two angels, everyone knew it. It rallied the French and terrified the English.
Can you give an example of that rallying effect?
Sure. Orléans is the classic one. The French troops are faltering, starting to retreat. Joan gets wounded, takes an arrow to the breast. Most people would be done for the day.
Right.
She pulls it out, gets it dressed, and goes right back into the fight, shouting, "There should be no retreat." It just electrifies her soldiers. And on the other side, the English are reportedly spooked. At Montepellier, there's an account of an English commander basically freezing, afraid to attack, just seeing her banner.
So inspiration on one side, intimidation on the other.
Exactly, and it worked. Over 30 cities apparently surrendered without a fight. Partly because word got around about her victories, but also, let's be honest, her threats and the results when cities didn't surrender, like at Jargeau, where over 1,000 people were killed after they refused, that reputation preceded her.
So the big triumphs. Orléans lifted in May 1429. That was the turning point, wasn't it?
Massive turning point. Then she leads successful sieges at Jargeau, Meung, Beaugency, Troyes, wins battles like Patay, and the crowning achievement, literally escorting Charles VII to Reims for his coronation in July 1429. That solidified his claim to the throne.
An incredible run. But you mentioned her approach was always aggressive. Did that ever backfire? Did she have weaknesses?
Oh, definitely. That reliance on artillery made her vulnerable if she didn't have it or didn't have enough gunpowder. And yes, her pure aggression wasn't always the answer, especially when the political winds shifted.
What do you mean? Charles VII?
Yeah. After he got crowned, Charles became much more interested in diplomacy, truces, negotiations. He wasn't keen on funding more aggressive campaigns. He actually dissolved her army at one point, cut her supplies.
Ah, so she lost her backing.
Pretty much. And suddenly she's outgunned in several fights. That led to her first real setbacks.
Which ones were those?
Well, there were 4 key losses. The attempt on Paris, the king actually called off the siege for political reasons. La Charité, she ran out of gunpowder during a winter campaign. Choisy-au-Bac faced superior enemy cannons. And then finally, Compiègne.
And Compiègne. That's where it ended for her on the battlefield.
That's where it ended. May 23, 1430. True to form, she leads this aggressive cavalry charge outside the city walls, gets thrown from her horse.
And the gates?
The gates were closing behind her. She gets left outside, captured by the Burgundians, allies of the English.
And that capture leads straight into the next phase, the trials. Starting with the condemnation trial in Rouen, 1431. This wasn't exactly a fair hearing, was it?
Fair. Not even close. You have to understand, this was fundamentally political. It was run by the English government and their French allies, like Bishop Pierre Cauchon. The whole point was to discredit Joan.
And by discrediting her.
They discredit Charles VII. If the woman who got him crowned was a heretic or a witch, what does that say about his legitimacy as king? See?
Right, I see. So the fix was in from the start.
Pretty much. The procedures were a sham. She's held in a secular prison, not a church one, chained up, guarded by male soldiers, which was hugely inappropriate, denied a lawyer or any real defense counsel. Even the court notaries later admitted they were pressured to basically cook the books, to falsify the records.
It sounds awful. What were the actual charges?
It started with about 70, eventually boiled down to 12 main articles. Things like her visions and voices being demonic, not divine, her predicting the future, wearing men's clothes, obviously, her military actions, leaving home without permission, even leaping from a tower during an escape attempt was twisted into a charge, saying God was on the French side. And crucially, her refusal to submit completely to the church militant, meaning the church hierarchy on Earth.
But she didn't just roll over, did she? She fought back.
Oh, she fought back brilliantly, considering the circumstances. She stuck to her guns about her revelations, but cleverly refused to tell them everything, saying, I don't have permission, or my oath doesn't cover that. She defended wearing men's clothes as practical and necessary. And she apparently had some sharp comebacks, too, like pointing out she spoke better French than her accusers.
Like? But ultimately, they got what they wanted.
How? It came down to something called abjuration. Under immense pressure, possibly the threat of torture, she briefly gives in. She signs a document, a confession, renouncing her voices, and agrees to wear women's clothes.
Okay, so she recanted.
Temporarily. But just days later, she's found wearing men's clothes again. And, more importantly, she tells the judges she regrets ever renouncing her voices, that they truly were from God.
And that was it.
That was the nail in the coffin. They declared her a relapsed heretic. Once you relapse, according to their rules, there's no going back.
So it wasn't just the cross-dressing, it was retracting her retraction.
Exactly. The relapse was the key legal point for them.
And the sentence.
Death. On May 30th, 1431, she was taken to the marketplace in Rouen. She was just 19 years old, burned at the stake. Reports say many in the crowd, even some English soldiers, were weeping.
A truly horrific end. But incredibly, that wasn't the final word legally, was it? There was another trial.
That's right. 20 years later, roughly, the rehabilitation trial, sometimes called the nullification trial, lasted from about 1450 to 1457.
Why? Why reopen the case after all that time?
Well, think about Charles VII. He's finally won the war, pretty much. He's secured his throne, retaken Normandy where Rouen is. But his legitimacy is still kind of tied to Joan. If she remains condemned as a heretic, well, it doesn't look good for the king she crowned.
So it was partly political for him, too.
Definitely partly political, but also her family, particularly her mother Isabel and her brothers, they never stopped trying to clear her name. They petitioned for it.
So how did this second trial work? Was it more legitimate?
Oh, much more. It was a formal process, sanctioned by the Pope. It involved a huge investigation, tracking down and interviewing dozens of witnesses who knew Joan throughout her life, a proper inquiry.
And what did these witnesses say? Did their testimony change the picture?
Dramatically, people from her village, Domremy, testified about her piety, her character. They clarified things like the local fairies tree. The first trial tried to make it sound like pagan witchcraft, but they said, no, it was just a place kids had picnics.
Okay. What about her military comrades?
They came forward, too. Men like Jean Dunois, the famous bastard of Orléans. They testified to her military skill, her courage, her divine inspiration. Dunois specifically mentioned she actually hated blood, often cried seeing soldiers die, and even comforted a dying English soldier. That directly countered the prosecution's attempt to paint her as bloodthirsty.
And the people involved in the first trial? The notaries.
Crucially, yes. Notaries like Guillaume Manchon testified officially, yes. The final verdict of the rehabilitation trial nullified the condemnation. It declared Joan innocent of heresy, called her a martyr, a holy woman. Her name was cleared. And of course, much later in 1920, she was formally canonized as a saint.
An amazing reversal. And even with her name cleared, her story just kept growing, didn't it? Her cultural impact seems almost boundless.
It really does. Her fame just exploded after her death, and it hasn't stopped. People have been writing about her, painting her, composing music about her for nearly 600 years. Someone tried to count back in 1894. They found over 400 plays and musical works already. By 1979, a library in Rouen had over 500 images and items just related to her. It's impossible to list everything.
What is it about her, do you think, that makes her such an enduring figure for artists and writers?
I think it's her ambiguity, in a way. She's this nexus of faith, Nationalism, gender roles, rebellion, martyrdom. You can project so much onto her. She can be a symbol for almost anything, depending on the era and the artist's intent.
Look at literature and theater. Mark Twain, of all people.
Right. Mark Twain, not exactly known for his religious piety, spent 10 years researching his book Personal Recollections of Joan of Arc, and apparently considered it his best work.
That is surprising. What do you think drew him in? Maybe her challenging authority.
Could be her sheer conviction, perhaps. Then you've got George Bernard Shaw's play St. Joan, which is a classic, really digs into the trial records. But then Bertolt Brecht takes her story and transplants it to 1930 Chicago stockyards, making her a labor leader.
Wow. Shows her adaptability.
Totally. And modern works keep pushing it. Carolyn Gage's play paints her as a victim of misogyny. Charlie Josephine's An I, Joan, which caused a stir at Shakespeare's Globe recently, portrays her as trans and non-binary. And there's even a sci-fi twist in an upcoming novel imagining she survived and a double was burned instead.
So we keep reinventing her based on our own contemporary concerns.
Exactly. We see ourselves or our struggles reflected in her story. Identity, power, faith, resistance. It's all there.
And it's not just books and plays. Music, too. You mentioned operas by Verdi and Tchaikovsky.
And rock operas, too. Arthur Honegger did one. David Byrne did a piece that framed her as a religious maniac who raised an army to kill people. Quite a different take.
Definitely. And then pop music references galore.
Oh, yeah. Leonard Cohen, Patti Smith, OMD, The Smiths. That famous line, as the flames rose to her Roman nose and her Walkman started to melt.
Classic. Plus Elton John, Kate Bush, Madonna, Little Mix. Chappell Roan recently depicted her at the VMAs. She just pops up everywhere.
And visually, too. Paintings, sculptures, even though the only image from her lifetime is just this rough little sketch made by a court clerk in 1429.
Really? Just that one sketch?
That's the only one contemporary. All the famous images in armor, at prayer, on horseback came later. But think of those iconic equestrian statues like Fremier's in Paris, or the one by Anna Hyatt Huntington in New York City.
That was the first public statue of a woman in NYC, right?
Yep, 1915. A huge statement back then. It shows how she became the symbol of female strength and achievement long before modern feminism.
And on screen, films have been made about her since the very beginning of cinema.
Pretty much. Georges Méliès did a short back in 1900. Then you have the silent masterpiece, Dreyer's The Passion of Joan of Arc, which is just devastating. Hollywood took several stabs. Ingrid Bergman played her.
And she even showed up in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Yes, played by Jane Wiedlin from the Go-Go's. And Luc Besson's big-budget The Messenger. TV shows like Joan of Arcadia used her as inspiration. She's unavoidable.
Games and comics, too, you mentioned.
Oh, yeah, tons. Age of Empires, Civilization, Assassin's Creed even gave her a fictional superweapon. Comics like Witchblade, cartoons from Hysteria, where she has a Valley Girl accent, The Simpsons, Clone High, Family Guy, RWBY, even an anime like Drifters, where she's portrayed as a villain. Her image is just infinitely malleable.
It really is. And her influence goes beyond just media portrayals, doesn't it? Like her haircut.
Believe it or not, yes. That short cropped hair she wore, it directly inspired the famous bob haircut created by the Parisian hairdresser Antoine in 1909. It became known as the coupe à la Jeanne d'Arc, a symbol of modern, liberated women in the early 20th century.
That's fascinating. And groups have adopted her name.
Yep. Like the female Cristeros fighters in Mexico in the 1920s called themselves Las Juana de Arco. And you still hear people today referred to as a modern Joan of Arc. Military figures, activists like Greta Thunberg being called the Joan of Arc of the environment. It shows she's still this potent symbol of conviction and challenging the status quo.
Okay, before we wrap up, let's quickly bust some common myths using our sources. First, that name, Joan of Arc. Not quite right.
Not quite. Her family name was Darc, D-A-R-C, not dark, like from Arc. There was no place called Arc connected to her family. She usually called herself Jehanne la Pucelle, Joan the Maid. The of Arc thing seems to have come later, maybe a misunderstanding or an attempt to make it sound more noble.
Got it. And the idea, especially with some modern takes, that she might have been trans.
Yeah, based on historical evidence, that doesn't hold up. Contemporaries, like Duke Alençon, are clear she wore men's clothes for practical reasons, safety, comfort in a military camp. It was controversial, it's a key charge against her, but it wasn't about gender identity as we understand it today.
What about mental illness?
Yeah.
The voices. Could it have been epilepsy or schizophrenia?
Historians and medical experts have looked into this extensively, and the consensus is largely no. She didn't show other symptoms associated with those conditions. People who met her, even her enemies, described her as shrewd, intelligent, coherent. And like we mentioned, Charles' death's own father suffered severe mental illness. Charles likely would have recognized the signs if Joan exhibited them. He wouldn't have trusted his kingdom to her.
Okay. Another one, Gilles de Rais, the notorious nobleman later executed for horrific crimes. Was he really her right-hand man?
That's pure fiction, basically. There's no reliable historical source saying they even met, let alone that he was her second in command. His documented crimes started well after Joan was dead. It's a connection made popular by later writers, probably for dramatic effect.
Right. And the big one. Did Charles VII betray her, just abandon her?
That's a myth historians have pretty thoroughly debunked. While he did shift to diplomacy, which undermined her military efforts, the idea he deliberately betrayed her to the English doesn't fit the facts. Remember, he was the one who pushed for and financed the rehabilitation trial 20 years later to clear her name. That's not the action of someone who wanted her forgotten or condemned.
Okay, thanks for clearing those up. It's been quite a journey today.
It really has.
We've gone from her humble beginnings through her incredible military campaigns, the sheer injustice and politics of her trials, and then this explosion of interpretations over centuries. Her story is just this powerful mix of faith, leadership, resilience, and how one person can echo through history.
Absolutely. She remains incredibly resonant.
So what's the takeaway for us today? As we wrap up, what should we be thinking about? In this world we live in now, full of information, shifting identities, Joan is still being debated, reinterpreted.
I think her story really forces us to ask some big questions, doesn't it? Like, what happens when deep personal faith runs up against institutional power? When individual conviction challenges the status quo?
Yeah. And what are we actually looking for when we look back at historical figures like her? Are we trying to understand them on their own terms, or are we using them as mirrors for our own time?
That's a key point. How do we decide which version of history or which interpretation of a figure like Joan is the one that matters? And maybe more pointedly, what does it say about us, about our society right now, when we feel the need to recast these figures, to make them fit our modern molds, our contemporary battles?
A lot to think about there. Definitely leaves you wondering how Joan herself might view all these versions of her story that have sprung up over the last 600 years.